Officer Rodriguez arrived at Willowbrook Estates, expecting a routine HOA dispute. What he found was Karen Whitmore standing in Susan Martinez's driveway, arms crossed, while Susan sat on her porch steps in tears, surrounded by coiled garden hoses and a growing puddle of frustration. "Ma'am, I understand there's a pool situation." Rodriguez approached carefully, recognizing the warning signs of an HOA president in full battle mode. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly." Karen's smile was razor-sharp. "As you can see, Mrs. Martinez has flagrantly ignored a direct order to maintain her property according to our community standards. The pool remains empty, creating both a safety hazard and a code violation." Rodriguez looked at the pool, then at Susan, who was now openly sobbing. "Mrs. Martinez, can you explain your side?" "The liner tore last week," Susan managed between sniffles. "I called 3 repair companies. The earliest anyone can come is Thursday. I tried to fill it with hoses, but Karen said I only had an hour, and..." She gestured helplessly at the massive empty pool. "She's had 6 days," Karen interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. "6 days to handle this properly. Instead, she's turned our beautiful neighborhood into something that looks like a disaster zone." Rodriguez suppressed a sigh. In his 5 years on the force, he'd learned that HOA disputes were often more volatile than domestic disturbances. "Mrs. Whitmore, while I understand your concerns about community standards, this appears to be a civil matter between neighbors." Karen's eyes flashed dangerously. "Civil matter? Officer, I have documentation of 17 separate HOA violations on the street alone in the past month. Trash cans left out past pickup time, unauthorized garden gnomes, cars parked facing the wrong direction." She flourished her clipboard like evidence in a murder trial. "If we don't enforce the rules consistently, we might as well live in anarchy." "Karen, please," Susan pleaded. "I've been your neighbor for 8 years. My husband died 6 months ago, and I'm trying to manage everything alone. Can't you show a little compassion?" The word compassion seemed to hit Karen like a physical slap. For just a moment, her rigid facade cracked, and something almost human flickered in her eyes. She remembered Tom Martinez, how he'd always waved from his garden, how he'd helped her carry groceries when she'd sprained her ankle 2 winters ago. But then she caught sight of the Hendersons across the street, watching from their window, and the Johnsons pretending to garden while clearly eavesdropping. The entire neighborhood was watching. If she showed weakness now, if she bent the rules for one person, where would it end? "Personal circumstances don't supersede community obligations," Karen said, but her voice lacked its earlier venom. "The rules exist for everyone's benefit." Rodriguez sensed the shift in dynamics. "Mrs. Whitmore, perhaps we could work out a reasonable timeline. Give Mrs. Martinez until Thursday to get the repairs done." Karen's jaw tightened. She could feel her authority slipping away, could practically hear the neighborhood gossips saying she was going soft. After 3 years of iron-fisted rule, one moment of flexibility could undermine everything she'd built. "Absolutely not," she declared, her voice regaining its steel. "Rules are rules, officer. If Mrs. Martinez can't maintain her property according to community standards, perhaps she should consider selling to someone who can." The emergency HOA board meeting was called for that evening. Karen sat at the head of the conference table in the community center, but for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was facing a firing squad rather than leading a meeting. 12 homeowners packed the small room, their faces grim. Bill Henderson had organized them, and Karen could see the determination in their eyes. Her 3 board members, usually loyal supporters, wouldn't make eye contact. "Before we begin," Bill announced, "I want to read something." He pulled out a petition. "This is a formal request for the removal of Karen Whitmore as HOA president, signed by 47 of the 62 households in Willowbrook Estates." Karen's world tilted. "You can't do this. I've dedicated 3 years of my life to this community. Property values have increased 23% under my leadership." "By making everyone miserable," interrupted Mrs. Chen. "My daughter won't visit anymore because she's afraid you'll find me for her car being the wrong color." "The Hendersons are considering moving," added another voice. "After 15 years here, They want to leave because of you. Karen looked around the room at faces that had once nodded approvingly at her monthly reports, at people who had elected her 3 times running. I was protecting our investment. I was maintaining standards. You are on a power trip, Bill said quietly. And today, when Susan needed compassion, you told her to sell her home. That's when you crossed the line from strict to cruel. The vote was unanimous. 47 votes for removal, 0 against. Even her board members abstained rather than support her. As Karen walked to her car in the parking lot, she felt more alone than she had since her divorce 5 years earlier. She'd thrown herself into HOA work after Richard left, finding purpose in creating order where her personal life had fallen apart. But somewhere along the way, maintaining control had become more important than building community. Susan Martinez was watering her flower beds when Karen pulled into her driveway. For a moment, their eyes met across the fence. Susan didn't wave, didn't smile, just turned away and continued watering. Karen sat in her car for a long time, staring at her perfect house with its perfect lawn and perfectly aligned mailbox. Everything was exactly as it should be according to the rules she'd spent 3 years enforcing. So why did it feel so empty? Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Phoenix. Sold a neighborhood Facebook page. Are you okay? Karen realized with a start that she wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay for a long time. She'd been so focused on controlling everyone else's lives that she'd forgotten how to live her own. As she finally walked to her front door, she made a decision that would have shocked the old Karen Whitmore. Tomorrow, she was going to knock on Susan's door and apologize. Not because the rules required it, but because it was the right thing to do. Behind her, Susan's pool repair truck pulled up, 3 days early. The driver waved cheerfully as he began unloading equipment. Soon the pool would be fixed, filled, and sparkling again. But the question that would keep Karen awake all night was whether the damage she'd done to herself and her community could ever be repaired just as easily. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Susan's tears stopped as shock took over, and even Officer Rodriguez took a step back. Karen immediately realized she'd gone too far, but pride wouldn't let her retreat. Karen. Susan's voice was barely a whisper. Did you just tell me to sell my home? The home where I raised my children, where my husband and I planned to grow old together? A crowd was gathering now. The Hendersons had emerged from their house. The Johnsons had abandoned all pretense of gardening, and Mrs. Chen from the corner house was walking over with her arms crossed. Karen felt the weight of their stares but couldn't back down. Not when her reputation as the neighborhood's Iron Lady was at stake. I'm simply suggesting that homeownership comes with responsibilities, Karen said, but her voice wavered slightly. If you can't meet those responsibilities, enough. The voice that cut through the tension belonged to Bill Henderson, normally the quietest man in the neighborhood. Karen, I've watched you terrorize the street for 3 years, and I'm done staying silent. Karen whirled to face him. Mr. Henderson, this doesn't concern. Like hell it doesn't. Bill's face was red with suppressed anger. You fined me $50 because my trash can lid was 3 inches askew. You made the Johnsons repaint their entire house because the color was too vibrant. You threatened to put a lien on Mrs. Chen's property because her rose bushes were 2 inches too tall. I enforced the covenants that we all agreed to. Karen began, but Bill wasn't finished. You hide behind those rules like a coward, he shouted. Susan's husband helped every family on this block. When my wife had surgery, Tom mowed our lawn for 6 weeks without being asked. When the Johnsons' basement flooded, he was the first one there with a shop vac. And now his widow is struggling to keep up with repairs, and your response is to tell her to sell. The crowd murmured agreement, and Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years: doubt. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, people she'd fined, threatened, and bullied in the name of community standards. When had their expressions changed from respectful compliance to barely concealed hatred? Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to suggest we all take a step back here. Mrs. Martinez, you have until Thursday to get your pool repaired. That's reasonable for everyone involved. No, Karen said, but her voice cracked. The rules clearly state. The rules state that pools must be maintained, Rodriguez interrupted firmly. Mrs. Martinez is maintaining hers by having it repaired. That's the end of the discussion. Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. 3 years of absolute authority, of being the undisputed queen of Willowbrook Estates, crumbling in a single morning. The neighbors were no longer looking at her with grudging respect. They were looking at her like she was the neighborhood monster. And maybe, Karen realized with growing horror, they were right. Karen Whitmore stood on her perfectly manicured lawn at 6:47 am, clutching her HOA violation clipboard so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She stared across the fence at her neighbor's empty swimming pool, its cracked concrete bottom gleaming in the early morning sun like an accusation. This was it, the smoking gun she'd been waiting for. "C.U.S. Anne," she bellowed, her voice carrying across Willowbrook Estates like a foghorn. "C.U.S. Anne Martin easy. Get out here, right now." Susan appeared at her back door in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Karen, it's not even 7 in the morning. What's the emergency now?" "Emergency?" Karen's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "The emergency is that your pool has been empty for 6 days, which is a direct violation of HOA Statute 14.7b regarding maintenance of water features." She waved her clipboard like a battle flag. "You're creating a safety hazard and bringing down property values." Susan rubbed her temples. "Karen, we're getting it repaired. The liner. I don't care about your excuses." Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made nearby dogs whimper. "The covenant clearly states all pools must remain filled and properly maintained. You have exactly 1 hour to refill it, or I'm calling code enforcement." 1 hour? Susan's coffee mug nearly slipped from her grip. "Karen, that's insane. It takes at least 6 hours to fill a pool that size, and the repair crew. Not my problem." Karen spun on her heel, her perfectly curled hair bouncing with righteous indignation. 60 minutes, Susan. I'll be timing you." As Karen marched back to her house, she felt the familiar rush of power that came with enforcing the rules. Someone had to maintain standards in this neighborhood, and clearly, she was the only one with the backbone to do it. She'd been HOA president for 3 years running, and under her leadership, Willowbrook Estates had become a model community. No brown lawns, no unauthorized decorations, no overnight street parking, and certainly no empty pools making the place look like a war zone. 57 minutes later, Karen stood at her kitchen window, watching Susan frantically trying to connect garden hoses while talking on the phone. The pool remained stubbornly empty. Karen smiled grimly and reached for her phone. "Time to call in the cavalry. Henderson County Code Enforcement." "Yes, this is Karen Whitmore, HOA president of Willowbrook Estates. I need to report a violation." She paused, watching Susan struggle with the hose connections. "Make that multiple violations. This is going to require immediate intervention."